Hey, excited to be on day 46 of the course and day 2 of PyQt6. So today we're going to continue working on PyQt6. Yesterday we looked at a simple example using a Q widget as our main object, and that generated this program. Today we're going to build a more complex program, so that is app 13, the student management system. So let's keep going. This is going to be very fun. I'll see you in the next videos. After having looked at an introductory app with PyQt6, we're ready to go ahead and code our main app, which is the student management system app. Specifically in this video, we will construct this window. So that's the main window, and then in the next lectures we're going to construct the other windows as well. So each of them one by one. Let's start with the main window. So I'll work on the same PyCharm project. This time I'm going to create a main.py file. The import statements are basically the same as in the example file, so I'm gonna copy that and paste it in here. We also need the sys library and create a class, call it main window, which inherits from, well, does it inherit from QWidget? No. This time we want to inherit from QMain window, another type of class. Why do we inherit from QMain window instead of QWidget, you'd ask? Well, we do that because QMain window allows us to add a menu bar here and a toolbar and a status bar here at the end. And QMain window is the class that allows us to do this division among the different sections of an app. QWidget, on the other hand, doesn't have that capability. So you want to use QMain window when you have a larger app. And larger apps usually also have multiple windows. So you'll see that later on we'll have other classes here. But this will be our main window. The other classes we will inherit from yet another class, the QDialog class, but that's for later. For now, we want to work on QMain window. The philosophy here is the same. You want to create an init method first, and you want to instantiate the parent init method as well. So these two are the very first things you want to do. And then again, you can set a title for your window, such as student management system. And so then we can add all these routine calls outside the class, right? So that would be main window. That's the main window class. So if I run this, yeah, basically we get this kind of window which can be expanded. So far it looks the same, but we can add a menu bar, a toolbar, and a status bar, and also the main central area. So let's do that. Let's start from the top. So let's add a file menu item and a help menu item. File menu item, which should be self.menu bar. So self refers to the main window class. So menu bar comes from QMain window, the parent of main window. So you call that method, and then you call .addMenu, the other method. And in here you specify what's the first item. So that's file. The convention here is that you should add this symbol in front and then file. Sorry, this is add menu. Duplicate that, so that would be the about menu item, the other, the help menu item. So file menu item, help menu item, and that would be help. And before we run the code and see what has happened in the GUI, we want to do something else here. We want to add the sub-items of these items. So, for example, in PyCharm, we have the menu items, but each of these items have their own sub-items, right? So we want to add at least one sub-item for each menu item. Let's start with the file menu item. Let's add an add student menu items. So the user can go to file, add student to add a new student to the table. The table is something we're going to create later. So these sub-items are actually known as actions. So let's create an add student action variable, which is equal to QAction. So QAction is a class which you need to import from pyqt6.qt-GUI import QAction. So with QAction you can create, for example, an add student action or sub menu item. And then you refer to file menu item, which we created in here, dot add action. So that's a method of this menu item, right? This method gets as input an action, a QAction object instance, such as add student action. This one goes here. Right, now we want to do the same thing with the help menu item. Let's add a sub item for that. About action, for example. That's equal to QAction. Let's call this about. And then we refer to that variable help menu item dot add action. And then this variable goes in here. Right, we're just about to run our code, but we also need to add self as the second argument inside QAction and do the same in here, self. So this will connect this QAction to the actual class. Right, let's run. So there we go. Now, depending on the operating system, you may see those menu items either in here or you may see them on top here. So file add student, that's my file menu item and that's my sub item for that item. Now the other help item is not displayed. That is because, at least on Mac computers, that is not displayed because you need to add something else here. So you only need to add this line now if the help item didn't show for you, otherwise don't type in this line. And that line is about action dot set menu role QAction dot menu role dot no role. So if I run this now, help is going to show there and about as well. There's also a search default sub item here, so that is added by default for help menu items. But the about page is there, which is something that we added in here. And that is how to create a main window with a menu bar. So we completed this step here. In the next videos we need to add a toolbar, then this table here, and then the status bar. So let's do that. See you in the next ones. Hey, welcome back. In this video we're going to add a table to this window. Previously we added the menu bar, now we add the table. Let's do that. So the table is going to be part of the main window. That means the code should be added inside the init method. So let's go down here and create a table, which is equal to QTableWidget, a new class that we need to import from QTWidget. So somewhere in here. So QTableWidget has to be instantiated, so add those parentheses there, And then we need to add columns and we need to add data to that table. Now for adding data, we're gonna have a separate load data method somewhere in here. And this load data method will have to refer to that table variable, right? But since this is a local variable, we cannot refer to that as it is. So we need to work on an attribute instead of an instance variable. So self.table, and then here we're going to do self.table. But let's leave the load data method as it is now. I just wanted to mention it so that we can use self before we write the other pieces of code. So now we can refer to self.table and use the set column count method. This method gets an argument, and that will be 4 in our case because we have 4 columns. So now we are starting to specify the properties of this table. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the columns, 4 columns. Once we have set the columns, then we do self.table. So we always refer to that table dot set horizontal header labels. And this is going to come as a tuple, so parentheses inside parentheses, and there goes ID name, so the column names that we are planning to have: ID name course mobile and mobile, so the mobile number of the student. Right, so we have created the columns. Now if you run this code, you're not going to see any changes to your interface. That's because you need to also add a very crucial piece of code, and that is self.setCentralWidget. So note that self here is referring to the main window instance, right? So we use the setCentralWidget method of this window, and then this method gets as an argument the central widget, which is table in this case. So we're not using a layout. A layout is used when you use the Q widget and when you have multiple widgets in your interface. But with Q main window, we have a different structure. We have a menu bar, we're gonna have a toolbar, and so we need to specify a central widget when we use a Q main window. That's what we're doing here. We're specifying the table as the central widget. So now if I run this, you're gonna see those 4 columns in here. There are no data, of course, because we need to add those data and we need to get them from an SQL database. And that is something we're going to do in the next video. So in the next video, we're going to add the data to the table. I'll see you there. Welcome back. Previously, we added this table with 4 columns to our interface. Now we're going to add data here. So by the end of this video, we're going to have some rows with actual data. Let's begin. Now, to add rows, we're going to use SQL. So we're going to use an SQL library called SQLite 3. This is a standard library, and this library has some functions which allow you to interact with the database. Now, since these are functions of the SQLite library, then it makes sense that we call those functions in a separate method, such as inside load data, instead of writing them in here. This could also be the case. You could also do this if you like. You can write those functions in here instead of in here. But keeping those functions inside this method makes things more organized. So that's what we're gonna do now. Go inside load data and connect to a database. Now I do have some data already in a database file, so please download the database file from the lecture resources and then paste it in your project directory. So this is what I'm doing. Add to Git perhaps. So that's my database.db file. Just to quickly show you beforehand what this database has inside, I can use the DB browser for SQLite program, which you can find online, download and install it, but you don't have to install this program. You can just look here. So if I go to browse data and I go to students table, so this database has a students table, right? A database is made of one or more tables. So this has an ID column, name, course, and mobile. So these are the data that we want to put on our PyQt program. And these data are inside database.db. Therefore, what we need to do is create a connection variable and use the SQLite 3 connect method and provide the database.db file. So make sure that database.db is located in the same directory with your main.py file, right? That allows you to simply provide the name of the db file in here. Then we want to extract the data out of the database. To do that, you need to refer to connection, the connection object. So that's a specific SQLite 3 object, which contains an execute method. And inside the execute method, you write an SQL query, such as select all from students. Students is the name of the table inside that database. I mentioned that a database can have multiple tables, so the table which have the data is named students. Then next we're gonna insert the results into the table. But before we do that, let's check what result looks like in the terminal. So run the program, expand the Run tab, and check if you got anything printed out. There's nothing in my case because I haven't called the load method yet. So we defined it here, but we're not calling it anywhere. So where should we call that method? Well, there are two ways to do that. You either call it inside here with self.load data, or you can also call it somewhere in here after you have created the main window. So hCalculator show, then you do hCalculator.load data. So let's try this version. Either way is fine. Let's rerun this. And yeah, so that's the results variable, right? It doesn't look anything useful for now because it's a cursor object. So you need to convert it into, for example, into a list, just like this, and rerun. And now we see some actual data. So that's a list of tuples. The first tuple represents the first row of the table. So the student with ID 1, the name of the student is John Smith. Math is the course the student has enrolled to. That's the phone number of the student. And of course, in the interface, we will add more students to the table, and these students will be added to the database as well, right? So we can delete these students, but for now we have some initial data, and these are those. Let's add those data to the table. So remember the structure of this. This is a list of tuples, right? So let's go here, delete that print function, and let's add the actual code which populates the table with data. This code will look like this. Let me show that to you graphically. So what we'll do is we're going to iterate for this to every row. So we're going to go to every row with the first for loop. Then inside this for loop, we're going to have another for loop, a nested for loop for cell in row. So basically the first loop will go to the first row, so it's going to get the first row, and the second for loop is going to go to each of these cells. So it's going to iterate over the cells of the first row. Then the main loop will go to the second row, the second loop will go to the cells of the second row, and so on until we populate all the rows with all the cells. Yeah, let's do that. For row number, row data in, enumerate result, so row number is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 depending on the row, and row data is going to be the tuple with the data, right? Such as 1, John, math, the number, and then we say self.table, so basically this that we're keeping here, self.table dot insert row number. So what we're doing here is we are inserting an empty row in a particular index in the table. So we're starting with the row with index 0. So we insert the first row, which has an index of 0, and then we say for column. So that's the second loop now. Number data in enumerate. This time we have row data, this data, right? So we're working on that tuple. And we try to insert that tuple into the first row. So we do self.table.setItem. So insert row was used to insert a row, an empty row. Now setItem is used to populate cells of that row with actual data. So setItem at row number. So we want to specify which row and which column using column number. So we specify the coordinates of the cell in the table. And then here comes a third argument, which is qTable widget item. This is a class we need to import. So next to qTable widget, we import qTable widget item. And then we use parentheses to call that class. And inside we say string data. And there's one last thing we need to perform before the loop, so between the result variable and the for loop. Here in the same indentation level we do self.table.setRowCount 0. This will make sure that whenever you load the program or do something, these data will not be added on top of the existing data, so you'll get duplicate data if you don't have this line. So this sort of resets the table and loads the data as fresh. And just before we execute this, in the same indentation level with the main code, we say connection.close to close the connection, and then rerun the program. So yeah, we've got something here. So these are the data. And that's how it works. So if you want to understand what's going on here, perhaps you want to insert some print functions such as print row data and execute. So see what you've got here as row data. So these are the row data that are being printed out, so tuples. So that's the code to add data to the table. we could do a small improvement just before we close this video. This index column here is unnecessary. You notice the first column, which is part of the table, not part of the data. We can disable that by going to the init method. So you know that we set a header for the horizontal space, so these were the column names, but we can do the same by doing self.table.vertical header. You call that method, sorry, this has to be a small v, lowercase v, so you call the method and after the parenthesis you do set visible and set it to false, so that will hide that column. So let's execute it again. And there we go. So now we don't have that duplicate index column there and the table is cleaner. So there we go. Next we need to add some action to this so that we're able to add more data. So how do you insert data into this table as a user from the interface? Let's do that in the next videos. I'll see you there. Hey, welcome back. In the previous video we populated the table with data. In this video we will implement the add student functionality. So currently we have the file and the help menu items, and let's implement the add student submenu item. So let's close that. Let's locate add student, which is a queue action, right? That's a queue action. That's how it's called in PyQt6. Now, once you have created that variable, then in the next line, you refer to that variable and then refer to the triggered property of that queue action instance, and then dot connect. This is a method, so in parentheses you should specify a function or a method. In our case it's going to be a method, just the method without calling it. So self-insert. What is self-insert? Self-insert is a method we need to add here now. Define insert, and this method is going to instantiate an insert dialog class and then execute that window. So this will be another class we will create. So let's do that class, insert dialog, which inherits from a queue dialog class, right? So our main window inherits from queue main window. Now this inherits from queue dialog. So this is a specific class in PyQt which serves the purpose of creating dialog windows like the one we have here in the sketch. So the user will be able to enter the name, the course, select the course and the phone number and press submit. When they press submit, that data will be added to the table. So this is how it works. One more time. We have the add student submenu item, right? So when the user presses that add student item, then the insert method will be called, right? The insert method itself is going to generate an insert dialog. And that dialog will be displayed on the screen as a pop-up window, basically. Yeah, that's the idea. So now all we have to do is implement the insert dialog class. Of course, the very first thing we do is define an init method with double underscores. And then the second thing is we call the parent class. So this is basically the same thing we did with the main window class, right? And then you want to set a window title, so I'll just copy this and paste it in here. Self set window title, so self refers to the insert dialog instance. the particular instance, the particular window instance that is generated when the user is using the program. So this QDialog class also have such a setWindowTitle method, just like the QMainWindow class has one. By the way, you can use the Structure tab now to navigate through your classes, right? Because the code is getting bigger and bigger, so you want to use the structure and you'll see all your classes there, and you can expand those. You can jump into a particular method like init, load data for the main window class, insert, and then you can collapse that, expand the other class, and you can easily navigate through your code. Right, let me make some space here between the two classes. And yeah, we want to change this to insert student data. It's good to set a fixed width of, for example, 300 and a fixed height of 300 as well. This is a good practice for dialog windows. This time we need to use a layout or a grid. You can also use a grid like we did with the example here, a grid layout. But since this window is structured vertically, like we have a text box and under that we have another drop-down list and then a text box and then the button, then it's more appropriate to just use a QV box layout. So make sure to import that. Make a comma here perhaps because it's getting too long, and in the next line make some space. So that should be fine. QBox layout is imported and it's used in here. And then let's create the widgets. The first one is the name. Let's say student name as the variable name is QLine edit. So we use the same widgets we used before with example.py, QLine edit, right? QLine edit. You can set a placeholder, student name dot set placeholder text name. You'll see how this will be displayed when we run the code. And lastly, we want to access the layout variable and the add widget methods and add student name to that layout. Let's see how things are working so far. So to do that, you want to refer to self set layout and set the layout variable as the layout. Right, then run the code. So that's the first window, the main window. So you want to go to File, Add Student, and that's our dialog. So all we have so far is the name text box. You see the placeholder there, name, that's the text, the string we placed in here. Now any other widgets that we add here will be stacked under this widget. So let's go ahead and add the other widget, which is this drop-down list known as the combo box in PyQt. So that would be the course name, right? The teacher, the user, is selecting a course to register that student. So that is QCombo box. That's something we need to import from the Qt widgets again. Combo box. Then we want to make a list of courses available for students such as biology, math, astronomy, and physics. Then we refer to the combo box variable, course name, dot add items, and then you provide the list courses to that. And then we want to add the combo box to the layout. So layout.add widget course name. So that's it. Let's add some comments such as add student name widget, add combo box of courses. Let's try this. So go to File, Add Student. Yeah, so now we have a combo box here with all those items. Right. Next, add the phone number, add mobile widget. So I'm going to copy these 3 lines and just change whatever we need to change. So mobile in here, mobile, set placeholder, mobile, layout.add widget, mobile. Lastly, we need to add a submit button, which is going to send all these user entries to the database. Let's call this the button because it's just one button, so we don't have to write it submit button or something else. So the button variable is equal to q push button. This is a class, you need to import this as well. If you haven't done so already, that's the button. So q push button, give it a name such as register or submit. And then when the button is clicked, you want to connect it to a method such as add student. So this will be a method which is going to be part of which class? So where are we now? Insert dialogs. So inside this class, make sure to unindent one space. To make sure you are in the same indentation level, you can use this minus icon here to fold this method, so that will not delete the code of the init method, it just folds it. So you can fold it and you can unfold it. So now I'm writing an add student method in here, right? So I make sure that this is in the same indentation level. So this is very useful when you have large classes. Now I can fold that out and add some code in here. Add student. For this, we need to establish a connection to the database again. So with SQLite 3.connect database.db, this time we need a cursor object. Connection.cursor, since we are inserting data. And cursor needs to execute the SQL query. So this time it's going to be insert into students, the name of the table. We want to insert name. I'll explain what these are: name, course, mobile. So that's like a tuple. And then after this, you write values. And then after values, you write parentheses and 3 question marks here. So that's the first argument of the execute method. Note that this is one string, right? Quotes here, quotes here. Then we need to add another argument. I'll write a comma and then enter to write the second argument in the second line. In here we need to write name, course, mobile. Now these are 3 variables that we have to create in here: name, course, and mobile. Name is going to be equal to the value that the user enters in the student name. So we need to access the student name from this method. But student name is currently a local variable of this method, so we want to convert it into an instance variable. So add self to all these 3 variable occurrences, and then in here you want to refer to self.student name and then extract the text using the text method. So now, this name variable, the value of this variable will be injected into the first question mark, so which corresponds to the name column. And then we do the same for this course, goes to the second question mark, mobile to the third question mark. So course is going to be self.course name, which also has to be an instance variable. So self.course name dot item text. This is a combo box, so you need to use item text here. Self.course name dot current index in parentheses. So that will give you the choice that the user made in the combo box. So we're talking about this combo box here. Mobile. This is self.mobile.text. So let's convert this into an instance variable as well. Self.mobile. Right, so that's the add student method. Oh, I have a typo here, course name, sorry. And also here we have an error highlighted from PyCharm. This has to be inside a tuple, so it's one argument, not 3 arguments. So that's the first argument, the string, and that's the second argument, the tuple. Then you need to refer to connection.commit. So you call the commit method to actually apply the SQL query to the database. Once you commit, you want to point to the cursor object dot close to close the cursor, and you want to also close the connection. So connection.close. Now we're ready to run the code and see what we've done so far. So let's go to File, Add Student. Let's add Jane Crow. Select a course in the course name combo box, such as astronomy, and type in a phone number. Press on register. Now, I press on register, nothing apparently happened, but we don't have any refreshing functionality yet, so the table is going to display the old data. Currently, only if you close the window, so close the program and then run it again, then you should be able to see the new added student, so Jane Crow there. However, we can improve this by adding the refreshing capability. One thing here is to note that the ID is added automatically because that is configured when the database file was created. So you can create database files using this program DB browser for SQLite. You can create a database file, you can create a table in the database, and you can specify, for example, that the ID column will be auto incremented, so the numbers, the IDs, will be unique and they will be added automatically. For example, I've got this 10 here because I'd added some more students before which occupied number 7, 8 and 9, and then I deleted those students, so now the next available number was 10. So that's a unique ID that is added automatically. Now, if you want to load the data, you want to go to the add student method in here and you want to do age calculator or whatever this is called. Well, we need to rename that to something better, but anyway, and then load data. So we're referring to the main window, basically to this class, to the instance of that class, and then we refer to the load data method. So we're calling that method. So run the program again, expand the window, file, add student, John Deere physics 1 2 3 4, press on register, and you'll see that John Deere was added instantly to the database table. So that load method is working fine. So we can close this. There is room for improvement, of course, but we can call this functionality as completed for now. So I would like to refactor this name, the age calculator here. So I'll go to refactor, rename, and I'll just call this main window refactor, and that will refactor all the occurrences of that variable. Here, here, there, and there as well. So now we have a more meaningful name, and I'll delete one line here. So just do some housekeeping, one more line in here. So yeah, things look better now. And that's about this video. So we have some more things to do, so I'll see you in the next one. See you. Hey, welcome to today's project. Your task for today is to add this edit menu item and a search submenu item for the edit menu item. Please ignore these other two. These are automatically added by my system. So add an edit menu item and a search submenu item, and you also should implement this dialog window. So when the user presses on search, this shows up. And that's your task for this project. Now in the next video, I'll show you the solution for this task, plus I'll show you also how to implement the actual search functionality here. So your task is just to implement the dialog window, not the search functionality, because that's a bit more advanced. I have to show you some new code for that. So the new code that I'll show it to you will enable the search functionality. For example, when the teacher searches for John Smith, this student, and they press on search, then all the occurrences of John Smith will be selected on the main table, as you can see here. So we have two students having the same name, for example, John Smith, and that is selected. However, this is not your task, so please just implement the edit menu item, the search submenu item, and this dialog window. Good luck, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Hey, in this video I'll show you the solution to the search functionality, which allows users to search for a student name, and when they press on search, that student will be selected on the table. It can be one student with that name or multiple students having the same name. Right, let me show you the code. Now, since I'm using Git, I'll use the git compare functionality by clicking on the last commit and then on main. So the compare functionality to show you the actual new code that I added, because this allows us to see the new code highlighted in green. So that's the old code we were coding before, and this is the code that you haven't seen yet. So the solution of the project. So first I added this line, the Qt class, which we'll need later on in the code. Then next, in line 17, you see this is a new line I added. I created the edit menu item. So that's this edit menu item, right? And then I created a search action using QAction, so search, and I connected that to edit menu item using an add action method. So that's the search action we created up here. And then when the user selects that search action, the self.search method will be called. Now, self.search, we are in main window here, right? So self represents the main window instance. Therefore, search is this method here, the method of main window. So this is also a new method I added. Here I instantiate a search dialog class, which I created further down. So that's a class. This class creates that search dialog window. So this one in here. So this dialog window has this init method, and then we set the parameters like the size and the title of the dialog window. I used a vertical box layout since we only have these two widgets stacked vertically. So one widget is the QLine edit widget. It's created in here, that first one. And the second one is the button widget, this button here. And then we set the layout. So this layout is set as the layout of the search dialog. Right. That was the init method. Now we go to the most important method of all, the search method. Let me give you more room here to view. That's the entire method. That's the entire code of the method. So let me go through each line one by one, what this method does. First of all, we grab the name that the user enters in the box here. So if they enter John Smith, then name variable will be equal to John Smith, that string. Then we establish a connection to the database. We create a cursor, and then let me expand here. So we're here, the cursor. Then we execute a query, an SQL query. This is the query. Select all from students, from the students table. But we have a condition here where the name column is equal to the name variable. The name variable is this one here. So if the user entered John Smith, that will be equal to John Smith. So we select all those rows and we store them in result. This will be in the form of a generator, so we need to convert them into a list. And what we get is a list of tuples. I can show you that. So let's say that we search for John Smith, we press on search. In the command line, we should see that being printed out. So we have a list of two tuples. One tuple here, the first occurrence of John Smith with ID 1, and the second occurrence of John Smith with ID 12. So that line was printed out by this print function. Then this line here, items, is equal to main window.table.findItem. What it does is it refers to main window. What is main window? Main window is a variable we created in here. This variable refers to the main window instance. All right, a main window is the class of the main window, right? And this class has a table attribute, right? So by doing this main window dot table, we access the table of the main window, the actual table object. And then this table object is a QTable widget type, right? It is an instance of that type. Therefore, that type, QTable widget, does have a findItems method, which allows you to enter these two attributes. The first one is the name you want to search, so that's John Smith, and this is a flag. So I imported Qt up in the code. That's the first thing I showed to you. And then .match flag, .match fixed string, so that will match that string. And that will give us some sort of generator object, and we need to iterate over that generator. And now each item looks like this. So that's the first item, and that's the second item. So those are basically items, cells of the table, in other words. But they look like this. So what we need to do is you refer to main window again, .table, .item. So item is again a method of table, and then this method gets two arguments. This is one argument, and this is the second argument. Now item.row gives us the index of the row of the current row, right? For example, 0. So this will be 0 for John, for the first occurrence of John Smith. And then 1 is the index of the column, right? So we want to select the cell in column with index 1 and row with index 0. So the first row has an index of 0, right? This is just the ID here, 1, 2, 3, etc. So these are the coordinates, basically, 0 and 1. And then we say set selected, so we select that particular cell. So that represents a cell, right? And then we say select that cell. And since we have two cells, when we search for John Smith, this loop will run 2 times, so 2 items, right? It will run 2 times, we have 2 items. And it will select 2 cells. And that's it. We close the cursor, we close the connection. And that's all the code. So thanks for following. We have more interesting code to write, so I'll see you in the next ones. See you.